Welcome to the Opt-in Podcast. I am Melissa Franks, your host, and this week we are talking about how to handle your emotions as a business owner or somebody who works for an emotional business owner. This podcast is where we talk about things that nobody really wants to talk about in the business world, and emotions are one of them. Now, what's really interesting is that as somebody who was inside of the corporate world for 25 years, the only emotion that we ever really dealt with was anger. And I have literally seen it all of it. I have seen things thrown and doors slammed and people storming out of office buildings or literally flying themselves home from trips. I have seen, myself included, women get teary-eyed and frustration and have to walk out of the room to compose themselves. There has been raised voices and all of those things. But the emotions that I see in small business, it's a whole other world. And I want to talk specifically about how those of us that are either running and owning or working inside of small businesses can navigate the ever emotional world of entrepreneurship. The first time I saw this, I was at an event full of entrepreneurs, and the event specifically was asking for us to consider a few things about our businesses and ourselves and really kind of do hard things, basically. And what was really fascinating to watch as we went around the room and I was looking at everybody that was so diligently working is that some were having extreme amounts of anxiety and others were word vomiting. And then some were literally in tears. And as I was sitting there, I was like, man, these are people with these incredibly successful businesses. They're 6 and 7 figure business owners. And this one little thing has brought them to their knees. Like they would never last in corporate. This would never fly. This would never be something that could actually be real in the world that I come from. And at the time I was still working in corporate and kind of dabbling in the entrepreneurial space. And I just remember being incredibly flummoxed by the emotion and ill-equipped for what to do. And now that I work with small business owners that own all sorts of businesses, all sorts of success levels between 6 figures and 8 figures, I have realized that entrepreneurship is emotional. It's not just a job, it's their livelihood, it's their baby, it's the thing that they've poured all of their blood and sweat and tears into, and if it doesn't work, there is no other choice. And so by the nature of that, every decision, every piece of bad news, every triumph is emotionally charged. And for those that work with small business owners, those that are small business owners, or those that are inside of these businesses where there's a healthy level of emotional fluctuation, I thought that what we should talk about today is some tactics around how to manage that so that as we are navigating, we can ensure that professionalism stays at the forefront. I am one that is incredibly logical and fact-based, so this probably won't surprise many of you when I say that in business, we should endeavor to always operate from a basis of fact. We should always look at things as an experiment until proven true or false. We should always be willing to accept the consequences of our actions if we don't get the outcome that we want. And saying that from a logical place is incredibly different than living through it from an emotional place. And this is what I think happens with business owners, is that they make a decision or they make a bet or something has been working really, really well and then stops working really, really well. And the immediate response is everything's wrong. Everything's broken. I need to give it all up. And there's tears and there's frustration and there's lots of words. It can be challenging for those that aren't caught up in the emotional vortex to try to figure out how to navigate it through. So here are just a couple of my tips that I have for you on how to navigate this exactly. And this podcast is going to be short this week. We're going to cover this topic lickety split because I don't want to belabor the conversation. I just want to point out that this is something you're going to come up against if you are in the small business sector. And I want to give you some tools so that you know how to navigate it without becoming emotional yourself or having somebody else's emotions explode all over you. Tactic number 1, ask questions to understand. Ask questions to understand. When emotions get high and people start to freak out a little bit, the very first thing that you can do is you can ask them to tell you more. Ask them how they know. Ask them to show you exactly what is going on. When you ask questions to understand, you invite them into a conversation. When you invite them into a conversation, they automatically have to calm down because they have to start using their rational brain to be able to formulate words and sentences and paragraphs to convince you that things are as dire as they think that they are, or to convince you that they are as wonderful and amazing as they are. So the very first thing that you want to do is you want to ask questions to understand. And the best way that you can do that is to ask why 5 times and keep asking why until you get all the way through it. And what's really interesting about asking questions to understand is often if the emotion is misplaced, it becomes incredibly clear that it is to the person who's misplacing it. So you don't have to do a whole lot of work to convince them to calm down, to get them to self-regulate. Just in getting the act of having them talk it out, you're able to deduce and identify that the emotional outburst, whatever it is, good or bad, was not the right one at the right time and for the right reason. So the first one is ask questions to understand. The second one is to ask questions to investigate. And this is where data comes into play. So when you're asking questions to investigate, you're asking them to show you, prove to me, demonstrate to me that what you are saying is so. Help me see what you see because I can't see it yet. And so again, this starts to pull emotion out of the conversation because what you're actually doing is you're walking them through a logical set of steps for them to be able to articulate and build a picture of this is what's actually happening. The evidence is saying this. The data is saying this. Here I can prove to you empirically that this amazing thing happened or this horrible thing happened. Ask questions to investigate. Drill down. Do more than have them explain to you. Have them show you exactly what they believe to be true. And spend the time. Even if you can clearly see a different outcome that they are, spend time and ask them questions and lead them to arrive at the same conclusion that you are now at. When you ask questions to investigate, what you do is you help them prove to themselves or disprove to themselves that what they believe to be happening is actually happening. The third one is that data always trumps drama, always. So if you are in a position where you know that the super high or the super low is being caused by something that is not true or is overstated or understated or whatever it might be, because you have the data to prove it, then prove it. Let's look at the facts. That's all you have to say. So whereas you were asking questions to understand in the first tactic and you're asking questions to investigate in the next one, the next one is where they prove it. The next one is where you actually sit down and you look at the information and say, like, where? Show me. Define to me that it is so, right? These 3 tactics, when you employ them together, give you a holistic viewpoint and an understanding of what's actually happening in the business. This is the fastest way to diffuse an emotional bomb that's in front of you. These 3 tactics are how you can literally change the emotional temperature in the room without lifting a finger. There are also going to be circumstances where emotions are high because they're just high. And these tactics are not the right tactics. And in the other cases where emotions are incredibly high and there's lots of crying or very big emotions around how much they care for you or care for the team or care for the business, those times you just have to ride the wave. You just have to ride the wave, and you have to decide how much of your energy you are going to give into it. You see, the thing with small business owners is that each one of them has an emotional temperature. Each one of them does. And so before you ever start working with or for a small business owner, the very first thing that you want to understand is what their emotional regulation is like. Are they somebody that tends to be real high and real happy all of the time and loves everybody and wants to share it and it's over the top? Are they somebody that has a pretty doomsday-like attitude and the sky is falling and there's always a challenge? And is that emotional energy that you want to be around? Is it somebody who flies off the handle and has massive emotional outbursts and then comes back and apologizes later? Is it somebody that avoids conflict at all costs, so breaks down in tears and then walks away and never gives you feedback and never discusses what happened, but you know that it was a big problem and you just don't know where you stand? You see, part of you making a decision to work in a small business is that you're also welcoming the entrepreneurial style of the owner, and that is primarily driven by their emotional temperature. And if you don't vibe with it, then it's not the right role for you. Because the one thing that you're not going to do is you're not going to change how an entrepreneur regulates. You're not going to change how an entrepreneur manages stressful situations. You're not going to be able to change any of those things. So if you don't like how they do it now, you're really not going to like how they do it then when it happens, and maybe you're directed into blowback. And this is fact is across all businesses. So if you're still sitting here and you don't plan on working in a small business, or you have and you've said it's not for me and you're working inside of a corporation, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story, and I'm burying it here on the podcast specifically for a reason. So for those of you that stuck around, you're getting credit for this. The second to last CEO that I worked with, she was incredibly emotional. And I was in a corporate environment, so I didn't get to pick my boss at all. You got what you got, and you literally did throw a fit. And she was emotional on like all of the spectrums. So she was incredibly supportive and positive and kind and caring, and also very swift to anger. You just really never knew what you were going to get. And you could get the kind and caring person, and literally 2 seconds later, the angry person could come out. And that was the first time that I had been in an environment with a female executive that was emotional that way. I had been around a whole bunch of male executives who would slam their fists on the table and throw things, all the things that I had mentioned at the top of the podcast. I had like seen it all and had cleaned up after a lot of it too, both figuratively and literally. But this was the first time that I'd actually watched a woman lose control, and I didn't really know what to do with it, because with the men, you just left them alone. You just let them like blow up, and then you pretended it didn't happen and you kept it moving. And that had been the way that it was for decades. And with her, that didn't work. It was really unnerving because you never knew where the target was going to be. B, you never really knew what you were going to get. And then C, you always had to address it. You couldn't just like walk away, pretend like it didn't happen. And also, things had pretty materially changed in the workplace at this point, and you just couldn't do that anymore. Or at least you couldn't do it publicly. And that was what was happening. And I can vividly remember being in one conversation where she just lost it. I was horrified, and there was nothing that I could do. I tried to stop it. There was nothing I could do to stop it. And I just remember thinking that that poor person on the receiving end of that, A, didn't see it coming, B, didn't deserve it, and C, I'm now worried about their mental health. And I think that what we don't realize when we surround ourselves with these highly emotional people in leadership is that it can really damage us from a mental health perspective without us even realizing it. It took 18 months for me to realize that she spent a lot of time gaslighting me because I just didn't know. you could see the organization of people, and there was hundreds of people that worked for us at the time. The mood of the organization really shifted with whatever mood she was in. When she was in a really good mood, everybody was in a really good mood. When she was in a really bad mood, everybody was in a really bad mood, and they were scared and they were anxious. And I think that one of the things that we have to talk about is self-preservation. And the best way when you are in an emotional work environment, whether it's your boss that's creating that, or it's other coworkers and colleagues, or it's the business owner or the whatever, the very best way for you to combat that and to be able to survive that and to be able to find a way to continue to be productive when you're in an emotional work environment is to really ground yourself in what's real. And I know that that seems maybe cold and callous, but the best way to counterbalance the emotional charge in the air and the atmosphere is for you to really be able to ground yourself in reality. Now, you know how there are many people out in the world that have a grounding practice. And what that is they literally barefoot go outside and stand like on the grass or on the dirt every day and ground. They hold space for the energy that is the earth. And this is a daily practice for very, very many. There's all sorts of experts that say that you should do this every morning, for example, and you should do it at first light so that you can kind of awaken your entire body because we're animals, right? And we respond to sunlight. So if you take that concept of grounding, that physical grounding, when you're in an emotional workplace, you have to do the same thing, except you're not going to take off your shoes and socks and go find some grass out in like the open space at the office. What you're going to do instead is you're going to build evidence for yourself that you're doing a good job. You're going to build evidence for yourself that you're on track. You are going to build evidence for yourself that your colleagues enjoy working with you and you have good working relationships. You're going to build evidence that you have received from management or senior leadership, accomplishment acknowledgments. You're going to ground yourself in facts. And so however you need to collect those things, whatever they are, I started creating a little folder in my email. So every time somebody sent me a thank you, it went in there. Every time I got praise from my boss, it would go into that folder. Every time I was able to declare I completed something on time or like whatever, I just had like this little evidence folder where I put things in. And then when things would go sideways and I would be like, oh, I'm so horrible at this, or I don't, this job isn't for me, or like whatever, I'd go into that little folder and then I would have proof that I was good at what I did, that my colleagues respected my work, that management valued me being there, right? And I was able to, no matter what was happening around me and in the outside noise, I was able to go back and ground myself and center myself in reality. This is real, that's noise. This is real, that's noise. And however you do that for yourself, if you are working in an environment where emotions flare and you second guess yourself, you start to feel bad, you think that you deserve whatever happened, so be it. Create that little space for yourself so you can go back and validate that you are good at what you do and you are valued and that you are in the right place at the right time. This is much more prevalent in small business than it is in corporate. But there are always actors that have an overwhelming amount of emotion, be it good or bad. And in order for you to be able to do your job in that environment, you need to find a way to navigate that. It's very easy for people like me to say, just go get another job. The reality is, in this environment right now, there aren't other jobs to get. I was just speaking with somebody today, in fact, and she said the job market is horrifying. It's horrifying. She said that either the positions that she wants to have the pay is so low it's laughable, or the positions that she's qualified for, the businesses are horrible, or the managers are horrible, or she's getting ghosted, and it's a nightmare. So I get it. Like, it's not necessarily easy to go find a job right now, and I'm not suggesting that you do. It's why I recorded this podcast, because I've had quite a few people ask me, how do I navigate this? Should I just leave? Should I try to change them? And the answer is, do not try to change them, but here are the tactics that you can use and employ to either pull the emotion back down into the place where it belongs and get you guys all back to a productive operational space, or at least here's some self-preservation recommendations so that you can continue to exist in a healthy and intact way until such a time as you can make a change, or the business makes a change if that's what it sees as fit to do. I mean, the reality is, we're in a world where behaving badly, apparently, has become acceptable. Just today, the President of the United States and the Vice President of the United States got into a shouting match with the President of the Ukraine, and it was caught on cameras and shown around the world. And if it's acceptable for the highest leaders in the United States of America and some of the highest leaders in the world to behave that way on a public stage, the unfortunate reality is that it's going to become more commonplace on private stages, because after all, you emulate the behavior that you respect, and these two men were elected into office. And so I just felt like it was relatively timely between how many questions I get from small business employees and, frankly, being quite embarrassed that that's how we showed up as the United States of America today in the world, that I should record this podcast so that I could give you at least some of the tips and tricks that I have learned over the last 25 years dealing with highly emotional executives and business owners, so that you can come out the other side. Because we're in a whole new world right now, and as much as I would love to tell all of you, you don't need to work in an environment like that, I think sometimes you're just going to work in an environment like that, and that's the way that it's going to be. I hope that this was helpful. Like I said, this is going to be super, super short. I look forward to your feedback and comments on this one. I bet a few of you are annoyed that I'm telling you to stay put and I'm not inviting you to go find new opportunities. Of course, you always should. You should always have your looking for work sign open, because you never know what opportunities are going to come. I just want to be really pragmatic and real, that I understand having to stay somewhere even though you don't want to, because it is the only option that you have, and that you're not defenseless just because you're in a bad situation. There are still things that you can do to preserve yourself and those around you until a change can be made. So, until next time, friends, please know you are wise, you are strong, and you are capable, and I believe in you.